You checked it again. You told yourself you wouldn't, but you did. You picked up the phone, unlocked the screen, went to that conversation, and the last message there was yours, still yours, sitting exactly where you left it, unanswered, like something left out in the rain. Your chest does something when you see that. Not quite pain, not quite anger, something that lives between the two. A tightening just behind the ribs, as if the body is quietly bracing for a blow that keeps not coming. Your breath shortens, not dramatically, just enough that you notice it, just enough that something inside you has gone careful. You put the phone down, face down, you try to move on. And then maybe 2 minutes later, maybe 20, you pick it up again, not because you expect a new message. Some part of you has already learned not to expect one, but because the act of checking feels like doing something, like choosing. When everything else in this situation feels like it has been taken out of your hands. This is what it feels like to be ghosted, not the silence itself. Silence you could handle if it had a shape, if it had a horizon. What does this to a person is the not knowing, the unanswered question pressed into every quiet moment of your day. The conversation you rehearsed in your mind that never gets to happen. The door that was not shut, it was left half open, just barely, just enough that you keep leaning toward it, still hoping someone will walk back through. Your mind runs the scene again. You search the last conversation for clues. A word slightly cooler than usual, a longer pause between replies, something you said that maybe you shouldn't have. Sometimes you find it, something to point to, something to blame, and sometimes you find nothing at all, just ordinary warmth, normal exchange, and then silence, and somehow the finding nothing is worse, because then the mind turns inward and the interrogation begins. What did I do? What did I say? What is wrong with me that they couldn't even say goodbye? You smile at people during the day. You answer questions, you get things done. And under all of it, this question is running quietly, persistently, like a sound with no location that you cannot stop hearing. Most people, when this happens, will do one of two things. They will turn outward in anger, calling the person cruel, cowardly, immature, and find a kind of company in that verdict. Or they will turn inward in self-examination, or more precisely, self-accusation, convinced the answer lies somewhere in their own inadequacy. Both roads feel like movement. Neither one leads anywhere that helps. Both roads in their different directions end at the same place. You, still oriented toward the person who left. You, still measuring yourself by their choice. You, still measuring yourself by their choice. You, still waiting. The brutal truth that this moment is trying to hand you is not comfortable. It will not feel like relief when you first hear it. But if you let it settle past the surface of understanding into something you can actually feel, it begins to do something that anger and self-blame cannot. It begins to return something to you. The person who ghosted you did not take something from you. What they revealed was already there, and what you do with that revelation is the only thing that now matters. There is a kind of suffering that does not come from what happened. It comes from what you are doing with what happened. The ghosting itself is already finished. It is done. Whatever was between you and that person, the connection, the warmth, the possibility, that chapter closed. Whether you were ready for it or not, whether it was done with care or without it, it is done. And the person who made that choice is not here, but you are, and inside you, something has not closed. Something is still open, still running, still waiting. And this continued waiting is doing more damage than the original silence ever did. Think carefully about what waiting does when it has no end point. Not all waiting is the same. There is a waiting that has a shape, waiting for something whose arrival you trust, that has a direction, a horizon. That kind of waiting you can manage. But waiting for something uncertain, for a message that may never come, an explanation that may never be offered. This is different. This is like trying to hold water in cupped hands. The effort is entirely real. The result disappears continuously, and you are left hour after hour, spending genuine energy on something that will not return what you give it. Every time you reread the last exchange, searching for what you missed, you are doing this. If you are doing this, you are doing the real work that produces no real information. Only the sensation of movement, the illusion that understanding might be just one more careful reading away. Here is what the mind does in the presence of uncertainty. It manufactures resolution. When someone goes silent without explanation, your mind will supply the explanation. It will do this automatically, without your permission, and almost always unkindly. It will not say, "Perhaps they are overwhelmed right now." They are afraid of a conversation they don't know how to have. Perhaps they are carrying something they haven't told you about. The mind under threat is not generous with those it is attached to. The mind under threat says, "You were not enough, you were too much, you were the wrong kind of person, with the wrong kind of energy, asking for the wrong kind of energy, asking for the wrong kind of things," and they felt it before you did, and you believe this story, not because it is true, but because the mind prefers a painful answer to no answer at all. A painful answer gives the illusion of understanding. It says, "I know what happened," and knowing, even grimly, even falsely, feels more solid than the open air of not knowing. This is not weakness. It was intelligence under pressure. The mind builds the story to give you somewhere to stand, to give you traction in the slipping. But what once kept you from falling can become, over time, the very thing that keeps you on the ground. Begin quietly. The next time the replay starts, the moment you feel the mind reaching for that familiar wound, pause, just briefly, before following it. You do not have to believe every story the mind presents simply because it presents it with conviction. And once you see what the waiting does, another layer becomes impossible to ignore. There are two people in this situation right now. The one who ghosted you, they are gone. They made their choice and they are living beyond it, in whatever way people live beyond the choices they make, without full awareness of what they leave behind. They are not here, but you are, and what you are doing in their absence is not neutral. What you continue to practice inside yourself matters more than what they did in that single cowardly moment of silence. Because here is the brutal geometry of being left without explanation. The person who left has already moved on. Maybe not cleanly, maybe with guilt, maybe with a story they tell themselves that makes their choice feel more reasonable than it was. But they moved in some direction, however imperfect, and you stayed, not because you are weaker, but because you are more attached, and attachment, when it is willing to look at itself honestly, has almost nothing to do with the other person's actual worth, and almost everything to do with what you needed them to confirm. This is not comfortable to see, and it does not mean your pain is invalid. Your pain is completely valid. Your suffering is not false. Some wounds are real, and this kind of wound, being left without the dignity of an honest ending, is one of the real ones. But valid pain and useful pain are not the same thing. You can be entirely right that something unjust was done to you and still be the one responsible for what you do with the aftermath. These two things can both be true at once. You smile when your heart is tired. You answer with "I'm fine" when the honest response would fill an entire room. You keep the wound private and the performance public, and then wonder why the private wound seems to grow larger the longer it goes unseen. Here is a distinction most people never make, and it matters deeply. There is a difference between missing the person who left and missing the life you imagined with them. In the body, these two pains feel identical. The same hollow sensation, the same reluctance to look at certain songs or times of day, the same impulse to reach for something no longer there. But they are not the same grief. One is for something that existed, the other is for something that only ever lived in possibility, a future constructed in hope before the facts were fully in. Understanding this distinction is not about making the pain smaller. The loss of a possibility is real. The grief for a future that was real to you, even if it never arrived, is legitimate grief. But when you can begin to separate them, even slightly, You realize that part of what you are carrying was never actually theirs. It was yours all along, a future you built, a possibility you tended. And you can, if you are willing, release a projection differently than you release a person. Forgiveness is not permission. Patience is not avoidance. Letting go is not indifference. Clarity is not coldness. Moving forward is not forgetting. These distinctions matter precisely because without them the mind slides into positions, the all or nothing of either, excusing everything or condemning forever, and both positions require so much energy to maintain that they hollow you out from the inside. Think about what a shadow looks like when the sun is near the horizon. The longer the light stays low, the longer and more distorted the shadow becomes, stretched far beyond the actual size of what casts. Stretched far beyond the actual size of what casts. The person who ghosted you is one thing, a real thing, perhaps significant. But in the low and uncertain light of your pain, the shadow they have cast across your life has grown enormous. It covers parts of your life they were never actually present in. You see it in the streets you begin to avoid, in the new connections you approach with preemptive guardedness, in the where you brace for abandonment before it has been offered, in the way you retreat into ordinary pauses. None of these things are theirs, but all of them are shaped by their absence. The shadow is not the person, and you are not obligated to live inside it. Begin quietly. Sit with this question. What precisely am I grieving? Not in general, specifically, not them as a whole, but what exact quality? What specific possibility? Name it as accurately as you can, because what you cannot name, you cannot release, and what you cannot release, you carry further than you ever intended to carry anything. And once you can name the grief clearly, something else becomes visible, something about the one who left that changes the shape of this story. People ghost for different reasons. This is worth understanding, not to excuse it, but to see it accurately. Some ghost from fear. They cannot endure conflict, cannot tolerate the discomfort of an honest ending, and so they choose the apparent cleanness of silence over the genuine difficulty of a conversation. Some ghost from a kind of indifference that carries its own particular pain. They had already left internally before they left externally, and the silence was simply the visible edge of an absence already complete. Some ghost from confusion. They do not know what they want or feel, and rather than admitting that uncertainty, they disappear into it. And some, in rarer cases, ghost from a poorly handled need for self-protection, because something about the situation felt unsafe, and they did not yet have the words or courage to say so. None of this makes the silence acceptable. Using disappearance as an exit, whether from fear, indifference, or confusion, leaves the other person without the basic dignity of a clear ending. That is a real failure of care. You are allowed to see it as such. But here is where the brutal truth becomes useful rather than merely uncomfortable. How a person behaves in the difficult moments of a relationship tells you something that all the easy moments never could. In ease, almost anyone can be warm. In comfort, almost anyone can be generous. But in the moments that require honesty, when honesty costs something, when staying present inconveniences them, when a true ending demands more courage than they have available, in those moments people reveal the actual shape of who they are, not who they aspire to be, not who they perform for the world, but who they actually live from when no one is watching them closely enough to expect better. The person who ghosted you showed you who they are when being truthful required more of them than they were willing to give. That is not a verdict on their entire being. People are at different places in their development. The one who cannot face an ending is someone who has not yet learned to sit with their own discomfort long enough to be honest with someone else. That is their work to do, work they may or may not choose to take on. But it is information, real information, and you are allowed to use it as such. Think of the sword in the hands of someone who has never trained. Every movement is governed by reaction. Every cut is a flinch, driven by fear rather than perception. The sword becomes in those hands a danger to everyone nearby, including the one holding it. But in the hands of the practitioner who has spent years learning to remain still under pressure, the same sword becomes something different entirely. Not just a tool, an extension of discernment. The practitioner waits, reads the space, does not move until the movement carries meaning. The years of training are not in the muscles alone. They are in the capacity to remain composed precisely when the moment demands the opposite. What you are learning in the aftermath of this silence is how to hold information without weaponizing it. How to know what someone showed you without deciding that. Everyone will show you the same. How to learn from one chapter without writing the entire future from it. Can you hold this pain without building a wall around every door? Can you carry the knowledge of what this person could not offer without assuming that everyone lacks it? Can you see clearly without seeing only what you fear? Begin quietly. When you find yourself using this experience as evidence in a broader case, evidence that people always leave, that you always end up here, that this is the pattern, stop. That is not clarity. That is the wound writing policy. One chapter is not a law. Evidence is gathered over time from many cases, not assumed from one. And once you can see what the experience revealed, you arrive at the hardest layer, the one that lives entirely inside you. There is something you have been reaching for that the other person was never going to give you. You have been calling it closure, but look at it honestly, without softening what you see. Closure in this context means something specific. You want them to explain it in a way that finally makes sense. You want confirmation that you were not the problem, or at least not entirely. You want them to acknowledge that what existed between you was real, that you were not invisible, that walking away without a word cost them something. You want one conversation that organizes all the chaos into something you can live with. And perhaps, if that conversation happened, something would ease. For a time, but whose peace would that be? Whose stability? Built on whose foundation? If your ability to move forward depends on someone who already chose silence, someone who demonstrated through the act of disappearing that they will not consistently show up for you when it costs them something, then your peace is standing on ground that person controls, and they have already shown you how they treat that ground when it becomes inconvenient. What you are actually searching for is not closure, it is permission. You are waiting for them to release you from the story, waiting for their confirmation that you are allowed to stop hurting, allowed to stop waiting, allowed to move on. And the most difficult thing I can offer you is this, that permission has always been yours. It was always yours. It was never theirs to give, and their silence cannot take it from you. You do not need them to understand your worth for it to be real. You do not need them to understand your worth for it to be real. You do not need their acknowledgement of the connection for the connection to have existed. You do not need their explanation to begin moving again. Their silence does not reach backward into time and dissolve what was genuine. What was true was true. What was real was real. These things do not require their confirmation to remain so. Most people will wait years for this permission. They will build entire inner structures around the unanswered question, becoming someone who was ghosted, someone who deserves an explanation they never received, someone who could snap their identity. And in constructing that identity, they give the person who left a kind of continued authority they were never owed. Do not hate yourself for having given it. Hatred is another cage. The longing for closure is completely understandable. It is the mind trying to complete what feels incomplete, to impose order on what arrived as disorder. But the resolution it seeks cannot come from outside. Consider water and stone. In any single moment, stone appears to win entirely. Water cannot cut granite in a single pass. A drop of water on a rock changes nothing visible, not that day, not that month, not perhaps for years, but water does not fight stone. Water does not harden itself to match stone's hardness. Water simply moves, finding every small opening, every channel, every path that exists or slowly forms, and over time, faithfully, without a drama, water bedect, the architect of what seemed permanent. The canyon was not carved by force or fury. It was made by patient, uninterrupted movement. You do not need to break through the wall of someone else's silence. You need to move, quietly, faithfully, in the direction that does not require their participation. Because the door was never the only way forward, it was only the direction your attention had been fixed upon. Begin quietly. Sit with one question and answer it as honestly as you can. If you knew with certainty, not hoped, but knew, that the explanation would never come, that no conversation would ever clarify what happened, what would you do with today, with this afternoon, with this week? The answer to that question is where your freedom actually lives, not in the explanation, in what you do we used to him. And once that question is answered, honestly, the deepest layer becomes clear, not the layer about the person who left, the layer about the one who is still here. Every day since the silence began, you have been practicing something. This is what almost no one understands about the aftermath of loss or abandonment. You are always practicing something. Not consciously, not deliberately, but every thought you turn to, every emotion you rehearse, every version of the story you retell in the privacy of your own mind. This is practice, and practice, regardless of intention, shapes what becomes automatic. It shapes what you reach for in the next moment of uncertainty, in the next relationship, in the next person who sits across from you, not yet knowing how afraid you have become of being left without explanation. If every day you return to the question of what is wrong with you, you practice the movement of self-diminishment. If every day you rehearse your grievance with them, you practice being someone whose inner life is organized around what another person chose. If every day you wait at the door they closed, you practice being someone whose present is defined by an absence. None of this makes you bad. None of this deserves shame. You are not broken for doing this. You are human for doing it, but do not confuse an unconscious habit with having no other option. You have always had another option. You simply, in the middle of the pain, could not yet see it clearly. The other option is not to stop feeling. Feeling is not the enemy. Pain is not the enemy. The question has never been how to stop hurting. That path, pursued directly, usually thickens the pain, makes it more solid, more resistant. The question is, what will you practice consciously in the space that pain occupies? Because whether you choose or not, something is being practiced. The only question is whether you are the one choosing. Can you hurt without becoming hateful? Can you remember without becoming imprisoned? Can you walk away without building your home inside the grief? Can you grieve without building your home inside the grief? Can you acknowledge what happened without letting it become the permanent center of your story? These are not rhetorical questions. These are the actual questions of a life lived with any inner steadiness at all. And they are not answered once. They are answered again and again, in small moments, in ordinary days, in the half second between the feeling and what you do with it. In that half second, something is available to you, something that does not always feel available, but that can be trained, can be cultivated, can grow more present over time. Think of the bamboo in a storm. It bends completely, without resistance. There is nothing in the bamboo that fights the wind by matching its force. The bamboo goes where the wind sends it. Bows so deeply it seems unlikely to survive, seems certain to break at any moment. And then the wind passes, and the bamboo rises, not unchanged, marked by the bending, marked by the storm, but rooted, standing, reaching upward again. You are not trying to become someone who is untouched by what happened. That is not mastery. That is the performance of mastery, which is its own prison. You are trying to become someone who can be fully touched, moved, bent brought low, and still return, still rooted, still capable of retreating forward. That is the own thought, not the strength that never bends, the strength that bends without breaking, that weathers without being destroyed, that survives the storm and rises in the silence after it passes. The person who ghosted you may not have intended all the damage they caused, or they may have, in some dim way, understood it and chosen silence anyway. Either way, their intention no longer determines your practice. What matters is not what they meant. What matters is not what they meant. What matters is what you now choose. Because what they meant went with them. But what you practice lives in you, in this moment, and in every ordinary moment that follows. You may not be responsible for what was done to you, but you are entirely responsible for what you continue to rehearse inside yourself. These are not the same burden. One was placed on you without your consent. The other is being carried by you, and only the second can be set down. Begin quietly. Choose one thing, just one, that you will practice deliberately today instead of returning by habit to that conversation in your mind. One small and honest thing that belongs to your own life rather than to their absence, not to escape the feeling, not to perform recovery, but to practice just once what it feels like to tend your own life with the same care and attention you have been pouring towards someone who is no longer here to receive it. Transformation that is real does not announce itself. It does not require an audience or a declaration. It shows up in quiet differences. The morning you realize you went an hour without returning to the question, the conversation you had without bracing for an ending, the moment you felt something good and did not immediately search for the catch. It is slow, this kind of change, and it does not move in a straight line. There will be days when the old loop starts again, when the hollow feeling returns, when you check one more time even though you told yourself you were done checking. These moments are not failures, they are reminders that you are human, and that the practice is ongoing, not completed. But over time, if you are willing, if you continue, the proportion shifts. Wound becomes smaller not because it disappears, but because your life becomes larger around it. You remove the waiting and real patience returns. Not the passive patience of someone who hopes, but the active patience of someone building something. You release the need for their explanation, and your own clarity grows in its place. You stop rehearsing their silence, and you begin to hear your own voice again, the one that knows what it values, the one that knows what it cannot accept, the one that was present before all of this and is still, quietly, present now. You stop performing your healing, and the actual healing begins, in private, without witnesses, in the ordinary moments of an ordinary day that no one else will ever see or measure. You stop waiting for permission, and you remember that you were never required to ask for it. Let your life become the evidence, not your words about what you went through, not the story you tell when someone asks, but your actual daily life, how you move through it, what you carry, how you treat the people in front of you, how you show up to the next connection with both openness and honesty, with both warmth and clarity. Let the person who sits across from you next experience someone who was left without explanation and chose, slowly and without announcement, to become larger for it. The seed that falls to the ground in silence with no witness still becomes what it was always capable of becoming. It does not require observation. It does not require applause. It requires only soil, time, and the quiet, faithful refusal to stop growing, even underground, even in darkness, to what it has always been moving toward. That seed of the Shabbat, and it was never waiting for them to water it.